There were two chains in my life. One was wrapped around a cave door in the Blue Ridge Mountains, rusted for 11 years. The other was wrapped around my sister's wrist as the headmistress dragged her toward the cellar for the crime of painting mountains on a wall with berry juice. The year was 1937. I was 17 years old. My sister Willa was 12. And on the morning I received the letter from the lawyer, both chains were about to break. The Evergreen Home for Girls sat on a hill outside Asheville like a gray tooth against the sky. It was not a cruel place in the way that some orphanages were cruel. No one beat us. No one starved us. But there is a particular kind of cruelty in being made invisible, in being taught that your highest purpose is to scrub floors and hem sheets and take up as little space as possible. I had lived behind those walls for 7 years. 7 years of washing other people's clothes. 7 years of watching my sister get punished for the one thing that made her feel alive. Willa saw the world differently than other children. She saw colors where others saw gray. She saw paintings in cloud formations and symphonies in autumn leaves. The doctors at the county hospital called it imagination. Mrs. Shackelford, our headmistress, called it a disorder. I called it the only beautiful thing left in our lives. That morning I was elbow deep in a wash tub when I heard Willa scream. The sound cut through the laundry steam like a knife through cotton. I knew that scream. I had heard it before, every time they caught her drawing on something she should not have drawn on. I ran. The dormitory was on the 3rd floor, and I took the stairs 3 at a time, my wet hands leaving prints on the wooden railing. When I reached the hallway, I saw them. Mrs. Shackelford had Willa by the wrist, dragging her toward the cellar stairs. Behind them, a cluster of girls stared at the wall where Willa had committed her crime. She had painted the Blue Ridge Mountains at sunset. She had used blackberry juice for the purple peaks and crushed dandelion for the golden sky, and something that looked like rust for the deep red that bled along the horizon. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in that gray building. It was also the largest. The mural covered 6 feet of wall. She must have worked through the night, silent as a ghost, while the other girls slept. "Mrs. Shackelford," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "Please, let me take her punishment. I will scrub the wall clean. I will work double shifts. Please do not put her in the cellar." The headmistress did not even look at me. "Rosalind, this is the 4th time your sister has defaced property. The cellar is the only language she understands. She is 12 years old. She is afraid of the dark. Then perhaps she will learn to control her impulses." Willa looked at me over her shoulder. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying. She had learned long ago that crying did not help. Instead, she mouthed 2 words that broke something inside my chest. "I'm sorry." She was apologizing to me for making me watch, for being the reason I could not sleep at night, for being born with a gift that this world punished instead of celebrated. The cellar door closed behind them. I stood in the hallway with my wet hands and my useless words and the most beautiful painting I had ever seen slowly dripping down the wall as the berry juice surrendered to gravity. I looked at my left palm. The scar was still there, a pale line that ran from my thumb to my wrist. I had gotten it 5 years ago, the winter I was 12, when they had locked both of us in the cellar during a cold snap. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and I had clawed at the wooden door with my bare hands until they bled, screaming for someone to let us out, while Willa curled against me shivering. They had let us out in the morning. My hands healed, but something else did not. I traced the scar with my finger and made myself a promise. One day I would get us out of here. One day Willa would have walls she could paint without punishment. One day we would belong somewhere. I did not know that day would come before the week was over. The letter arrived 3 days later. It was addressed to me in careful copperplate script. Miss Rosalind Harmon, Evergreen Home for Girls, Asheville, North Carolina. The envelope was thick, the paper expensive. I had never received a letter in my life. Mrs. Shackelford called me to her office and watched me open it, with eyes like a hawk watching a mouse. I think she expected bad news. I think she expected me to crumble. Instead, I read the words 3 times to make sure they were real. The law firm of Patterson and Webb regretted to inform me of the death of my great-great-grandfather, Ezekiel Harmon, who had passed away in 1926. However, as his sole surviving heir, I was now entitled to claim his estate in Sable Hollow, Watauga County, North Carolina. The estate consisted of 6 acres of mountain land, a cabin, and a cave that had been sealed by Mr. Harmon shortly before his death. There were conditions. I had to live on the land for a minimum of 1 year. I could not sell the property or lease the mineral rights during that time, and I had to be at least 17 years of age to claim the inheritance. I had turned 17 2 months ago. "A cave," Mrs. Shackelford said, reading over my shoulder. "How peculiar. May I go?" The words came out before I could stop them. "Go where? To live in the mountains by yourself? You are 17 years old, Miss Harmon. You have no skills, no money, no—" "I have land, I have a cabin, and I am taking my sister with me." The headmistress laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "Willa is 12. She is a ward of this institution until she reaches 18. You cannot simply take her. I can if I become her legal guardian." Something shifted in Mrs. Shackelford's face. She had not expected me to know the law, but I had spent 7 years in her library, reading every book I could find, preparing for the day I might need to fight. "The courts will never grant guardianship to a 17-year-old girl with no income and no prospects. Then I will wait until they do, but I will not leave without her." We stared at each other across her desk. The clock on the wall ticked through 30 seconds of silence. Then Mrs. Shackelford did something I had never seen her do. She looked away first. "There is a provision," she said quietly. "In cases where a minor has inherited property sufficient to support dependents, guardianship can be expedited. It was designed for young men inheriting family farms, but the language does not specify gender." I waited. "If you file the paperwork this week, you could have custody of your sister within the month." She paused. "The estate will need to be verified, of course. You will need to prove it is habitable." "I will prove it. The locals say that cave is cursed." "Then they are wrong." Mrs. Shackelford studied me for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "Your mother was a student here, you know, before she married. She had the same look in her eyes that you have now, like she was already somewhere else, somewhere we could not follow." I did not know what to say to that. I had so few memories of my mother. She had died bringing Willa into the world, and our father had shattered like glass against stone. He had lasted 3 months before leaving us on the steps of this building with a note pinned to my coat. "I cannot look at them without seeing her. I cannot stay." He had gone west. No one had heard from him since. "Go," Mrs. Shackelford said. "Claim your inheritance. Take your sister to her mountains. But know this, Miss Harmon. The world does not treat orphan girls kindly. You will need to be stronger than stone." I touched the scar on my palm. I already am. The journey to Sable Hollow took 2 days. A bus from Asheville to Boone, and then a mail carrier named Otis, who agreed to drive us the last 18 miles into the mountains in his truck. Willa sat between us on the bench seat, her small suitcase clutched on her lap. Everything she owned fit inside it. A change of clothes, a Bible that had belonged to our mother, a set of colored pencils that I had stolen from the schoolroom 3 years ago and hidden in the lining of my coat. She had not spoken since we left Evergreen. I think she was afraid that if she said anything, she would wake up and find it was all a dream. Otis filled the silence for us. He was a lean man in his late 50s with kind eyes and hands that had known hard work. He talked about the weather and the roads and the price of coffee in Boone, and then he started talking about the man whose land we had inherited. "Ezekiel Harmon," he said, steering around a pothole that could have swallowed a small pig. Now there was a character. Folks still talk about him, though it's been 11 years since he passed. What do they say? That he was either a genius or a lunatic, depending on who you ask. He came up from Charleston around 1910, bought the land site unseen, built himself a cabin, and spent the next 16 years doing something inside that cave. "What kind of something?" Otis glanced at me. "That's the mystery, isn't it? He'd go in at dawn and come out at dusk, covered head to toe in dust. But not regular dust. Colored dust. Red one day, blue the next, yellow after that, like a rainbow had exploded on him." Willa stirred against my shoulder. It was the first sign of interest she had shown since Asheville. "People figured he was mining," Otis continued, "but he never sold anything, never shipped anything out, Just went into that cave and came out looking like he'd been swimming in a paint pot. And then he sealed it, I said. And then he sealed it 3 days before he died. Had the blacksmith make the chain specially. Told everyone the cave was dangerous. Cursed, some said. He made the whole hollow promise never to open it. Why? Nobody knows. Some folks think there's bad air in there, poison gas from the rocks. Others think he went crazy and there's nothing inside but empty stone. Otis shrugged. Either way, nobody's touched it in 11 years. People around here keep their promises to the dead. We drove in silence for a while after that. The road climbed higher into the mountains, winding through Sourwood and Laurel, past streams that tumbled over moss-covered rocks. The air grew cooler and cleaner with every mile until I could taste the pine on my tongue. Then Otis said something that made my stomach tighten. There's a man you should know about, Victor Crane. He owns the bank in Boone and about half the businesses in the county. He tried to buy your great-grandfather's land 3 times before the old man died. What happened? Ezekiel refused. Wouldn't even discuss it. That made Crane angry. Men like him don't like being told no. Otis paused. He's been waiting 11 years for someone to inherit that land. I expect he'll come calling soon enough. Let him come. Otis looked at me with something like respect. You sound like your great-grandfather. He said the same thing. The truck rounded a final curve, and suddenly the valley opened up before us like a secret being revealed. Rolling hills covered in hardwood forest, a creek that wound through the bottomland like a silver ribbon, and beyond it all, the Blue Ridge Mountains rising in layer after layer of blue until they dissolved into the sky. Willa gasped. I understood why. It was the view from her painting, the one she had made on the dormitory wall, the one they had washed away with soap and water while she sat alone in the cellar. She had never seen this place in her life, but somehow she had known exactly what it looked like. Welcome to Sable Hollow, Otis said. Your new home. We found the dog on the side of the road half a mile from the cabin. He was a young thing, maybe a year old, with copper-colored fur matted with mud and eyes that held more resignation than fear. He did not run when the truck stopped. He did not growl when Willa climbed down and approached him. He simply lay there in the weeds, waiting to see what the world would do to him next. Oh, Rosa, Willa said, and her voice cracked on my name. Look at him. I looked. I saw ribs showing through dull fur. I saw a rope burn around his neck where someone had tied him and left him to die. I saw an animal that had learned the same lesson Willa and I had learned in that orphanage, that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you simply walk away. We cannot take a dog, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew I was lying. Please. Willa knelt in the dirt beside him. Please, Rosa. He is like us. She was right. He was exactly like us. Abandoned. Starving. Waiting for someone to see him as something more than a burden to be discarded. I knelt down beside my sister. The dog lifted his head and looked at me with eyes the color of amber. Then he did something that undid me completely. He licked my hand. The scarred one. The one I had torn open, trying to save my sister from the cold. Copper, Willa whispered. His name is Copper. I did not argue. Some things are simply meant to be. The cabin was smaller than I had expected. A single room with a stone fireplace, a bed, a table, and walls that let in more light than they should have. The roof sagged in places. The floorboards creaked with every step. A family of mice had taken up residence in the woodpile by the hearth. But it was ours. For the first time in our lives, we had a place that belonged to us. Otis helped us unload our suitcases and promised to check on us in a few days. Then he drove away down the mountain, and we stood on the porch watching his dust settle on the road, and the silence of the mountains settled around us like a blanket. Rosa, Willa's voice was barely a whisper. Look inside. I turned, and then I understood why Ezekiel Harmon had spent 16 years inside a cave. The cabin was full of color. Jars lined every windowsill, every shelf, every surface. Hundreds of jars arranged by hue, from white so pure it looked like captured moonlight to black so deep it seemed to absorb the light around it. Between them flowed every color imaginable, reds from rust to crimson, yellows from butter to gold, blues from powder to midnight, greens and purples and oranges that made my eyes ache with their intensity, And on the walls, hung in simple wooden frames, were paintings. Not ordinary paintings. These were landscapes of the hollow and the mountains beyond, rendered in colors so vivid, so impossibly saturated that they seemed to glow from within. The greens were greener than any leaf I had ever seen. The blues were deeper than the sky outside the window. A sunset over the ridge, painted in a red so rich it looked like the mountain was bleeding light, made me catch my breath. Willa walked to the nearest window and picked up a jar of blue powder. She held it up to the light, turning it slowly, watching the particles catch and scatter the sun. "It's pigment," she said. "Pure pigment, like they used to make oil paints." "How do you know that?" "There was a book in the Evergreen Library about the old masters, how they used to grind their own colors from rocks and minerals." She set down the blue and picked up a red. "This looks like cinnabar, and that yellow might be orpiment. And that white, that pure white, that could be lead white or zinc or—" She stopped. Her hands were trembling. "Rosa, these are the colors in my head, the ones I see when I close my eyes, the ones I could never make with berry juice or dandelion stems. They are real. They exist." I looked at the jars of pigment. I looked at the paintings on the walls. I looked at the ridge behind the cabin where, hidden somewhere in the trees, a wooden door waited beneath 11 years of rusted chains. "He was not mining," I said slowly. "He was making color." Willa nodded. "He was mining color. He was pulling it out of the mountain. And he sealed it away." We both turned to look through the back window. The ridge rose steep and dark behind the cabin. Somewhere up there, wrapped in iron chains, was a door that had not been opened since 1926. "We have to open it," Willa said. "Yes. The townspeople say it is cursed. The townspeople are wrong." Willa looked at me. Her eyes were bright with something I had not seen in years. Hope. "How do you know?" I pointed to the walls, to the paintings that made the whole world seem more alive. "Because cursed things do not create beauty like this. Whatever is in that cave, it is not a curse. It is a gift." Victor Crane came on the second day. He arrived in a black automobile that looked expensive and out of place on the dirt road. A man of about 52 climbed out of the driver's seat and stood for a moment surveying the cabin, with eyes that calculated everything they saw. He was tall and lean, with silver hair swept back from a face that had probably been handsome once, but had hardened into something sharper. He wore a suit that cost more than everything Willa and I owned combined. When he smiled, it did not reach his eyes. "Miss Harmon," he said, extending his hand. "Victor Crane. Welcome to Watauga County." I did not take his hand. Copper stood beside me on the porch, his ears flat against his head, a low growl building in his throat. "Mr. Crane, the mail carrier mentioned you might visit." "Did he? I hope he also mentioned that I was a friend of your great-grandfather." "He mentioned you tried to buy this land 3 times. The smile flickered but did not fall. "A business matter. Nothing personal. Ezekiel was a stubborn man, but I respected him. I am here today to offer you the same courtesy I offered him." "Which is?" $500 for the property. Cash. Enough to set you and your sister up comfortably somewhere civilized." I looked at the man who had waited 11 years for this moment. 11 years of watching the cabin decay. 11 years of waiting for an heir who might be easier to manipulate than the old man who had built it. "No." Crane's eyes narrowed. "I do not think you understand your situation. You are 17 years old. You have no income, no skills, and no connections in this community. The cabin is barely habitable. The land produces nothing. And that cave everyone whispers about is just an empty hole in the ground. Then why do you want it so badly?" The question hung in the air between us. Crane's smile finally disappeared. "I am offering you a kindness, Miss Harmon, one that will not be offered again. Take the money, leave this place. There is nothing here for 2 orphan girls." Copper's growl grew louder. Behind me, through the open door, I could feel Willa watching. "Mr. Crane," I said, "my great-grandfather spent 16 years working in that cave. He sealed it with chains specifically to keep men like you out. He left this land to me, and I am not leaving." Crane's face went cold. "The property taxes on this land are $47 in arrears. If that debt is not paid within 60 days, the county will seize the property and auction it to the highest bidder." He paused. I will be the highest bidder. 60 days, $47. Numbers that might as well have been a million. You have made your offer, I said. I have given my answer. Please leave. Crane looked at me for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to his automobile. Just before he climbed in, he looked over his shoulder. Your great-grandfather thought he could defy me too. He died alone on this mountain with nothing but his paints and his delusions. You will end up the same way. The automobile disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust. I stood on the porch and watched it go, my heart hammering against my ribs. 60 days, $47, 2 girls and a dog against a man who owned half the county. Willa's hand slipped into mine. We are going to open that cave, she said. Yes, tonight. I looked at my sister. She was 12 years old. She had spent half her life being punished for seeing beauty where others saw disorder. And now she was standing on the porch of a cabin we might lose in 60 days, asking me to break open a door that had been sealed for 11 years. Tonight, I said, we break the chains. I want to pause here for a moment and ask you something. 2 orphan girls, 17 and 12 years old, standing in front of a cave that everyone believes is cursed. One side holds a rumored curse that the whole town fears. The other holds a man who wants to take everything they have. 60 days to find $47 or lose it all. If you were Rosa, what would you do? Let me know in the comments below, and stay with me, because what they found inside that cave changed everything. We waited until dark. The moon was full that night, painting the ridge in silver light that made the trees look like they were carved from mercury. Willa and I climbed the slope behind the cabin, with Copper ranging ahead of us, his copper coat flashing between the sour woods like a flame passing through shadow. The cave entrance was exactly where Ezekiel's map said it would be, a wooden door set into a limestone outcrop, wrapped in chains so thick they could have anchored a ship. The metal had rusted into a solid mass over 11 years, brown and orange and red, like dried blood against the gray stone. I held up the lantern. The padlock was fused solid. No key in the world could open it now. I found this in the woodshed, I said, pulling Ezekiel's hand sledge from my coat. He must have used it for splitting kindling. Willa looked at the chains, then at the hammer, then at me. Let me do it. Willa, please, I need to. I understood. For 7 years, she had been punished for trying to create beauty. For 7 years, people had told her that her gift was a disorder, a defect, something to be corrected rather than celebrated. Now she was standing in front of a door that might contain everything she had ever dreamed of, and she needed to be the one to open it. I handed her the hammer. She approached the door slowly, reverently, like a pilgrim approaching a shrine. She raised the sledge over her shoulder, took a deep breath, and swung. The sound of iron striking iron rang through the hollow like a bell. She swung again, and again, and again. On the 5th strike, the padlock shattered. The chains fell away with a sound like old bones dropping, and the wooden door swung inward on hinges that screamed with 11 years of rust. The smell that came out was not danger or death or poison. It was earth, clean mineral earth, the smell of stone and water and deep time. And underneath it, something else, something faintly sweet, faintly sharp, like crushed flowers mixed with chalk. Willa looked at me. Her face was lit with moonlight and something brighter. Together, she said. We stepped inside. The entrance passage ran about 20 feet into the hillside, narrow and low, before it opened into the first chamber. I held the lantern high and the light caught the walls, and I forgot how to breathe. The cave was a palette. Bands of color ran through the limestone like frozen rivers. At the bottom, ochre in shades from pale yellow to burnt sienna. Above it, a stratum of iron-rich clay blazing rust red, so vivid it looked wet. Higher still, where the limestone met a different geological layer, veins of blue-green copper carbonate wound through the rock like ivy climbing a wall. Malachite and azurite, I thought, remembering the book Willa had told me about. Natural pigments worth more than gold, and in pockets and crevices throughout the chamber were deposits I could not name. A purple so deep it was almost black, a white that sparkled with mica, a gold that caught the lantern light and threw it back doubled. But Ezekiel had not just discovered the minerals, he had built a workshop to process them. Along the left wall stood a workbench made of heavy oak planks. On it sat a grinding station, a large flat limestone slab worn smooth by years of use, and a muller, a heavy stone shaped for crushing pigment. Beside it were sieves of different mesh sizes, ceramic bowls for washing and settling, glass jars for storing finished pigment, and on wooden racks lining the wall, hundreds of dried pigment cakes. Concentrated color pressed into small blocks, labeled in Ezekiel's handwriting with the source mineral and the date. Ochre, yellow, 1918. Azurite, coarse, 1921. Malachite, levigated, 1924. Cinnabar, vermilion grade, 1923. 16 years of work, 16 years of pulling color from the mountain and transforming it into something artists would recognize instantly as treasure. Rosa! Willa's voice was hushed. Look! She was pointing to a tin box beneath the workbench, half hidden in shadow. I knelt and pulled it out. The lid was sealed with wax, protecting whatever lay inside from the damp. I broke the seal and lifted the lid. Inside was a letter, and a red leather notebook. The letter was addressed in Ezekiel's handwriting, for the one who breaks the chains. I opened it with hands that smelled of mineral dust and read aloud. If you are reading this, you have broken the lock. Good. The chains were never meant to keep the cave closed forever. They were meant to keep it closed until the right person came, someone who would use what is inside for the right reasons. I looked at Willa. She nodded. Keep reading. I sealed the cave because a man named Crawford Crane offered me $2,000 for the mineral rights in 1925. When I refused, he threatened to take the land through tax liens. I sealed the cave and told people it was dangerous so that Crane would lose interest. A cursed cave is worthless to a man who wants profit. It worked. He moved on to other schemes. But I was old and sick, and I could not unseal it myself. Victor Crane's father, the same game passed down through generations. The colors in this cave are not mine. They belong to the mountain. I spent 16 years learning how to take them without harm, how to grind and wash and settle pigment without poisoning the water, without collapsing the structure, without taking more than the cave can give back. My instructions are in the red notebook. Follow them. The mountain is generous but not infinite. There was a final paragraph. One more thing. There is a third chamber. You will find what I consider my real work there. Not the pigments, not the paintings in the cabin. Something I believe is more valuable than all the color in the world. You will know when you are ready to see it. Make something beautiful. That is all I ask. Ezekiel. I closed the letter. Willa was crying, not sad tears, the kind that come when you realize the world is bigger and more wondrous than you ever imagined. He was not crazy, she whispered. Everyone said he was crazy, but he was a genius. Yes, and he left it all to us. I looked at the walls of color, at the workshop where a dead man had spent 16 years perfecting an art that nobody knew existed. I thought about the $47 we needed in 60 days. I thought about Victor Crane waiting like a vulture for us to fail. We're going to learn everything in that notebook, I said. We are going to make pigment. We are going to sell it, and we are going to save this land. Willa wiped her eyes and squared her shoulders. When do we start? Tomorrow, at dawn. Della Mae Coggins came on the 7th day. I heard her before I saw her, a voice calling hello from the direction of the road. Copper barked once, then fell silent. When I stepped onto the porch, I saw an old woman climbing the path toward the cabin with a basket over her arm and a walking stick in her hand. She was 71 years old, though I would not learn that until later. Her hair was white as the mica in the cave, pulled back in a bun that looked like it had not changed style since the previous century. Her face was a map of wrinkles, each line earned by laughter or sorrow or the simple weight of years. And her eyes, when they met mine, held a light that made me trust her instantly. You opened it, she said. It was not a question. Yes. And you found the colors? Yes. She nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had known for a long time. Then she climbed the porch steps and sat down in the rocking chair like she owned it. My name is Della Mae Coggins. I was Ezekiel Harmon's friend, perhaps his only friend. I have been waiting 11 years for you. I sat down across from her. Willa appeared in the doorway, a smear of yellow ochre on her cheek. Waiting for us. Waiting for whoever broke the chains. Ezekiel told me someone would come. He said I would know them when I saw them. She looked at Willa's ochre-stained face and smiled. I know you now. How did you know him? I am a weaver, the best in 3 counties, though I say it myself. Ezekiel used to make dyes for me from his pigments. Natural dyes that produced colors in wool and cotton that no plant could match. My textiles won prizes at the state fair 3 years running. Her smile faded. When he sealed the cave, I lost my colors. I have been weaving with onion skins and walnut hulls ever since. They are fine, but they are not Ezekiel's colors. Willa stepped onto the porch. You knew how to use the pigments for dyeing? I knew everything Ezekiel knew about textile color. He taught me over 15 years of friendship. Delamay's eyes moved between us. And I can teach you. Why would you help us? Because Ezekiel asked me to. Before he died, he made me promise. When they come, he said, teach them what I taught you, and make sure they understand. I asked him what I was supposed to make them understand. You know what he said? We waited. He said, that color is not decoration. Color is language. Color is the way the mountain speaks to those who listen. We began that afternoon. Delamay was a demanding teacher. She expected us to learn quickly and complain loudly when we did not. But she was also patient in the ways that mattered. She showed me how to grind ochre on the muller, working the stone in slow circles until the powder was fine as flour. She showed Willa how to mix pigment with mordants and fixatives to create dye baths that would bond permanently with fiber. And she told us stories about Ezekiel, about the hollow, about the generations of people who had lived and died in these mountains. The old ways are not gone, she said one evening, as we sat by the fire while a batch of wool simmered in an ochre dye bath. They are just sleeping, waiting for someone to wake them up. Is that what we are doing? Willa asked. Waking up the old ways? You are doing something rarer than that. You are learning to see. Most people look at a mountain and see a pile of rock. Ezekiel looked at that same mountain and saw 1,000 colors waiting to be released. That is not skill. That is vision. And vision cannot be taught. It can only be recognized. She looked at Willa with something like reverence. Your sister has the vision. I saw it the moment she walked onto the porch with ochre on her face. She sees the world the way Ezekiel saw it, in color. Willa ducked her head, embarrassed but pleased. What about me? I asked. Delamay smiled. You have something else, something just as rare. You have the strength to protect the vision, to fight for it when others try to destroy it. Ezekiel had his colors, but he had no one to shield him from the world. That is why he sealed the cave. He could not fight Victor Crane alone. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Your sister will create beautiful things, and you will make sure she is free to create them. Together, you will do what Ezekiel could not do alone. Our first products were ready 3 weeks later. 5 scarves dyed in the colors of the Blue Ridge at sunset. Ochre fading into sienna, fading into a deep rust that glowed like embers. Delamay had woven them on her cherry wood loom, and even she admitted they were some of the finest work she had ever produced. We took them to the market in Boone on a Saturday morning. The town was larger than I expected, with brick buildings lining Main Street and farmers setting up stalls in the square. We found a spot near the fountain and spread out our scarves on a wooden table Otis had loaned us. People stopped to look, then they stopped to touch, then they stopped to buy. By noon, we had sold all 5 scarves for $12 total. I stood there with the money in my hand, doing the arithmetic in my head. $12, 47 needed, 35 to go, 40 days remaining. It was possible, difficult, but possible. Then I saw Victor Crane walking toward us through the crowd. He did not approach our table directly. Instead, he went to each of the merchants who had bought our scarves. I watched him speak to them in low tones, watched their faces change from pleasure to uncertainty to resignation. One by one, they came back to our table and asked for refunds. I am sorry, the hardware store owner said, pressing the $2 back into my palm. I cannot sell goods from that property, not while there are questions about the title. There are no questions about the title. That is not what Mr. Crane says. By the time the sun set, we had sold nothing. Every scarf had been returned. The $12 had evaporated like morning dew. Crane found us as we were packing up to leave. "A good effort," he said, with that smile that never touched his eyes. "But you see how it is. No one in this county will buy from you. No one will help you. In 40 days, the land will be mine, and you will be back in that orphanage where you belong." "Ah." Willa's hands were shaking. I put myself between her and Crane. "Leave us alone. I am simply explaining the reality of your situation. I own this town. I own the people in it, and soon I will own your cave." He leaned closer. "Your father ran away because he was weak. You will run away for the same reason. That is what people like you do." I thought about the scar on my palm, the nights in the cellar, the years of silence and gray wool, and being told that my highest purpose was to be useful, quiet, and small. "You do not know anything about me." Crane just laughed and walked away. That night he came to the cabin. It was after midnight. Willa was asleep, and I was sitting by the fire reading Ezekiel's red notebook when I heard Copper start to growl. Low and steady, the kind of warning that meant danger. I picked up the fire poker and went to the window. Crane was standing at the edge of the clearing, just visible in the moonlight. He was alone. He was watching the cabin. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. "Trespassing is illegal, Mr. Crane. So is harboring a minor without proper guardianship papers. I checked. Your petition is still pending. One word from me to the judge, and your sister goes back to Asheville." My grip tightened on the poker. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something." He took a step closer. "Your great-grandfather thought he could defy me. He sealed that cave thinking it would protect his precious colors from my family. But here is the thing about time. It always wins. He is dead. I am alive. And in 40 days, everything he built will belong to me." Copper burst past me, barking furiously. Crane stumbled back, and for one satisfying moment, I saw fear in his eyes. "Control your animal. Leave my property. Your property, for now." He retreated toward the road, but he called over his shoulder. "Your father abandoned you because he could not bear to look at you. He saw your mother in your faces, and it broke him. What makes you think you are strong enough to hold on to anything when even your own father could not hold on to you?" He disappeared into the darkness. I stood on the porch until I stopped shaking. Then I went inside and found Willa sitting up in bed, her eyes wide. "I heard everything. Willa, he is wrong. About father, about us, about all of it. I know. We are not going to run. No, we are not." She lay back down, but I could tell she was not sleeping. I sat in the rocking chair and watched the fire die down to embers. And I thought about what Delamay had said, about vision and strength, about protection. We had 37 days. We were not going to fail. "I need to stop here and ask you something. Rosa and Willa have been beaten down by a man who controls everything. Their first attempt to make money failed completely. Victor Crane owns the merchants, the judges, perhaps even the future. 37 days to raise $35 with no one willing to help. But they still have one thing Crane does not know about, the third chamber, the one Ezekiel said held his real work. What do you think is waiting inside? Tell me your guess in the comments, then keep watching to find out if you were right. Dr. Marguerite Holloway arrived on a September morning when the mountains were just beginning to blush with the first colors of autumn. She came in a dusty Ford with university plates, a woman of about 42 with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and hands that had clearly spent years working with delicate things. A painter in Asheville had told her about strange pigments coming out of Watauga County, pigments of a quality he had not seen since studying the old masters in Europe. She found her way to our cabin by asking questions in Boone. No one wanted to help her, but she was persistent in the way that academics often are. She arrived at our door with curiosity burning in her eyes. "Miss Harmon, I am Dr. Marguerite Holloway. I teach art history and conservation at Duke University. May I see your pigments?" I looked at this stranger with her expensive education and her university credentials. Victor Crane had taught me to be suspicious of outsiders. Why? Because the painter who told me about them used words like impossible and unprecedented. Because I have spent my career studying natural pigments, and if what he described is accurate, You may be sitting on one of the most significant mineral discoveries in American art history." She paused. "And because I am curious, curiosity is an occupational hazard in my profession." Something about her honesty made me trust her. I stepped aside and let her in. Dr. Holloway spent 4 hours in the cave. She examined the mineral deposits with a magnifying glass. She tested the ground pigments with chemicals she had brought in a leather case. She read pages of Ezekiel's red notebook with trembling hands. When she finally emerged, her face was pale with astonishment. "The ultramarine," she said. "The blue. It is lapis lazuli quality, or something so close I cannot tell the difference without laboratory equipment. Is that good?" "Good? Miss Harmon, natural ultramarine of this purity is worth $200 an ounce. Museums pay fortunes for it. Art conservators beg for it. The medieval painters used it to paint the Virgin Mary's robes because it was more precious than gold." I thought about the jars of blue powder lining the cave walls. There were dozens of them. "And the malachite," Dr. Holloway continued, "and the vermilion. Even the ochres are exceptional. The iron content, the particle size distribution. Whoever taught your great-grandfather knew techniques that most modern pigment makers have forgotten. He taught himself, from trial and error. Then he was a genius." She said it simply, as a fact. "I want to buy your pigments. For the university, we will pay fair market prices." "How much?" Dr. Holloway did some calculations in her head. "For a modest initial order, $60. I felt the number hit me like a wave. $60. More than we needed. Enough to pay the taxes with $13 to spare. "I will write you a check today," Dr. Holloway said. "But first I have to ask, is there anything else in this cave?" I thought about Ezekiel's letter, the third chamber, the real work. "You will know when you are ready to see it." Willa appeared beside me. She had been listening from the entrance of the first chamber. "There is something else," she said. "Something we have not looked at yet." "Why not?" Willa glanced at me. "Because we were waiting. For the right moment." "Doctor." Holloway's eyes narrowed. "And now?" My sister took my hand. Her fingers were warm and steady. "Now is the right moment." The passage to the third chamber was narrow, barely shoulder width, and it curved downward for about 30 feet before opening into a space that was smaller than the first two chambers, but taller, much taller. The ceiling rose into darkness above the reach of our lanterns. Dr. Holloway held up her lamp and gasped. The ceiling was painted. Not just painted, transformed. Every inch of the limestone surface had been covered with a mural so vast and so detailed that it took my eyes several seconds to understand what I was seeing. It was Sable Hollow. Our hollow, painted from above, as if Ezekiel had somehow floated over the valley and captured it in pigment. The mural spiraled outward from the center of the ceiling. Spring bloomed at the core, dogwoods in white, redbuds in pink, the first tender green of new leaves. Summer expanded around it, heavy and rich, the creek's lazy blue ribbons winding through emerald forest. Autumn blazed next, a riot of orange and gold and crimson that made even Ezekiel's jar pigments look pale by comparison. And at the edges, winter, the mountains white and silver and blue under a sky full of stars. 4 seasons, 1 valley, painted on stone with colors pulled from the mountain itself. I heard Willa make a sound beside me. When I looked at her, tears were streaming down her face. "It is the painting," she whispered, "the one I made on the dormitory wall, the one they washed away." I looked at the mural again. She was right. The composition, the colors, the way the mountains folded into the distance. Willa had painted this scene without ever seeing it. She had carried it inside her, some genetic memory passed down from Ezekiel through our mother to her. She had been trying to paint her way home, and she had not even known it. Dr. Holloway was walking in slow circles beneath the ceiling, her lamp held high, her mouth open in wordless wonder. "This is a masterpiece," she finally said. Not in the casual way people use that word. A genuine masterpiece. The kind of work that belongs in museums, that scholars write books about, that changes the way people understand what art can be. She turned to face us, and her eyes were wet. "How long did he work on this?" 16 years, I said, according to his letters. He lay on his back like Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel for 16 years, alone, in the dark, and he created this. She shook her head slowly. The world called him crazy. They said he was a hermit, a fool, and all the time he was making something immortal. Willa walked to the center of the chamber and stood directly beneath the heart of the mural. Spring surrounded her like a blessing. Why did he hide it? She asked. Why keep something this beautiful a secret? I thought about Victor Crane's father, about the threats and the tax liens and the greed that had driven Ezekiel to seal away his life's work. Because the world was not ready, I said. Because men like Crane would have destroyed it to get to the minerals. Because some things are worth more than money, and Ezekiel knew that no one would believe him. Dr. Holloway nodded. He was protecting it, waiting for someone who would understand its value, someone who would share it with the world for the right reasons, not the wrong ones. She looked at me. You could become famous. This discovery would put your name in art history books. Museums would come from around the world to see this ceiling. And Victor Crane would find a way to take it from us. Perhaps, or perhaps the attention would protect you. It is harder to steal something when the whole world is watching. I looked at Willa. She was still standing beneath the mural, her face tilted upward, light from the lanterns playing across her features. Not yet, I said. Ezekiel waited 16 years. We can wait until the time is right. Dr. Holloway studied me. And when will that be? I thought about Crane, about the lawsuit that might come, about all the battles we had not yet fought. You will see, I said. When the time comes, everyone will see. It was the same thing Ezekiel used to say, and for the first time, I understood why. We paid the taxes the next morning. The clerk at the county office looked at us like we had walked in with a two-headed calf. Two girls, neither of us old enough to vote, paying off a debt that Victor Crane had been counting on. Word spread fast. By the time we returned to the cabin that evening, Otis had already heard. Crane is not happy, he told us, leaning against his mail truck. Heard he threw a glass at his wall when the news came through. You've got under his skin, and men like him don't forget that. Let him be unhappy. Just be careful. A wounded snake is more dangerous than a healthy one. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Rosa and Willa had built something beautiful. 5 years of success, of color, of the life their great-grandfather had dreamed they might have. But Victor Crane was still out there, still waiting, still planning. And wounded snakes, as Otis said, are the most dangerous kind. What do you think Crane would do? What weapon would a man like that use against two orphan girls who had beaten him? Leave your guess in the comments. The answer is coming. The next 5 years were the happiest of our lives. Dr. Holloway kept her promise. She returned every month, sometimes with colleagues, always with payment for pigments and reverence for the ceiling she could not yet share with the world. She helped us build the Harmon Pigment Company into something real. We supplied artists across the Southeast. We shipped jars of carefully ground color to museums that needed historically accurate pigments for restoration work. We trained with Delamay until our hands knew the Muller and the dye bath, as well as our own heartbeats. Willa painted. Of course she did, with pigments of her own making, on canvases that I stretched in the studio Delamay helped us build. Her work had the same quality as Ezekiel's, that impossible luminosity that came from using colors pulled directly from the earth. People began to talk about her, the mountain girl who painted like the old masters. I did not paint, but I learned to weave on Delamay's cherry wood loom, and I discovered that cloth could hold color in ways that canvas could not. I made blankets and scarves and hangings that people said captured the Blue Ridge Mountains in a way that photographs never could. And I fell in love. His name was Soren Whitfield. He was a carpenter from Avery County who came to Sable Hollow to build shelving for our workshop and stayed because of what he saw in the third chamber. I took him there on our fourth meeting. I do not know why. Something told me he was ready. He stood beneath Ezekiel's ceiling for 30 minutes without speaking. The seasons swirled above him. Spring to summer, to autumn to winter, and the lantern light made the colors dance like living things. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were wet. "How is this here?" he asked. "How is this in a cave?" "Because the man who painted it was told he was crazy," I said. "And caves do not judge." He looked at me differently after that. like he was seeing me for the first time. You are protecting this. Yes. From the world? From the people in the world who would destroy it. He nodded slowly. Then let me help you protect it. Victor Crane's lawsuit arrived in the summer of 1943. The document was delivered by a deputy sheriff who refused to meet my eyes. It alleged that Ezekiel Harmon had borrowed $800 from Crawford Crane, Victor's father, in 1924. It claimed that the debt had never been repaid. It demanded that the estate be transferred to Victor Crane as settlement. Attached to the lawsuit was a promissory note, signed supposedly by Ezekiel Harmon himself. It is a forgery, I said to the lawyer Dr. Holloway had recommended. Ezekiel would never have borrowed money from the Cranes. They were enemies. That may be true, but proving a document is forged is difficult, and Judge Harlan Whitmore will be hearing the case. Whitmore? He and Crane have been friends for 30 years. The trial was set for October. We had 3 months to find proof that the signature was fake, or we would lose everything. Willa found the answer in Ezekiel's red notebook. She had been reading through it again, memorizing the pigment formulas, when she noticed something strange about the handwriting. The early entries, from 1910 to 1915, were written in a careful, formal script. But the later entries from 1920 onward were different. The letters leaned at a different angle. The pressure on the pen varied. The loops on the lowercase letters were shaped differently. His handwriting changed, she told me, spreading the notebook on the kitchen table. Look, around 1919 or 1920, it is still his hand, but the style is completely different. Why does that matter? Because the signature on Crane's document looks like the early handwriting, before whatever happened to change it. She paused. If Ezekiel's hand changed in 1919, and the loan was supposedly made in 1924, the signature should match the later style. But it does not. I stared at the notebook, at my 18-year-old sister who had just found the key to saving everything we had built. We need an expert, someone who can testify about handwriting analysis. Dr. Holloway knew someone at Duke, a professor who had consulted on document authentication for the Library of Congress. She drove to Durham that night and returned 3 days later with Dr. Edwin Marsh, a small man with enormous spectacles and hands that trembled slightly when he held the notebook. He spent 2 days examining Ezekiel's writings, the notebook, the letters in the tin box, the labels on the pigment cakes. He compared them to the promissory note Crane had produced. On the 3rd day, he delivered his verdict. The signature is forged, competently forged, but forged nonetheless. The creator used Ezekiel Harmon's early handwriting as a template, probably copying from a document dated before 1920. But Mr. Harmon's fine motor control changed significantly around that time, possibly due to a minor stroke or the onset of essential tremor. Any authentic signature from 1924 would reflect that change. This one does not. I felt the tension in my chest begin to ease. Will you testify? I would be honored to. What Ezekiel Harmon created in that cave deserves to be protected. The trial was held in the Watauga County Courthouse on a clear October morning when the mountains were blazing with color. Victor Crane sat at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, a sleek man from Charlotte who charged by the hour and looked at Willa and me like we were insects to be squashed. Judge Whitmore presided from his elevated bench, his face carefully neutral, though his eyes kept drifting to Crane, like a dog watching its master. The courtroom was full. Everyone in the county had heard about the case. Della Mae sat in the front row with Soren beside her. Otis had closed the post office to attend. Even Dr. Holloway had driven up from Durham. Crane's attorney spoke first. He presented the promissory note. He described the alleged debt. He painted a picture of Ezekiel as a confused old man who had borrowed money and forgotten to repay it. Then it was our turn. I stood and called Willa as our first witness. She walked to the stand with Ezekiel's red notebook in her hands. She was 18 years old, slight and quiet, with ochre permanently stained into the creases of her fingers. Crane's attorney smirked when he saw her. "State your name for the record," I said. "Willa Harmon." "Miss Harmon, do you recognize this notebook?" "Yes, it belonged to our great-great-grandfather, Ezekiel Harmon. It contains his instructions for making pigments, along with personal notes and records dating from 1910 to 1926. And have you observed anything significant about the handwriting in this notebook?" "Yes." Willa opened the notebook to a marked page. Between 1919 and 1920, Ezekiel's handwriting changed dramatically. The angle of his letters shifted. The pressure became more variable. The loops on his lowercase letters became less consistent. What might cause such a change? According to our expert witness, it is consistent with a minor stroke or the development of essential tremor, a condition that affects fine motor control. And the promissory note submitted by Mr. Crane. Which period of handwriting does that signature match? Willa looked directly at Victor Crane. The early period, before 1919, not the period when the loan allegedly occurred. A murmur went through the courtroom. Crane's face had gone very still. I called Dr. Marsh next. He explained his findings in careful academic detail. He showed enlarged photographs of the signatures. He pointed out the inconsistencies that proved the promissory note was a forgery created by someone using old documents as a reference. When he was finished, I called one more witness. Della Mae Coggins took the stand with the dignity of a queen taking her throne. Mrs. Coggins, how long did you know Ezekiel Harmon? 15 years, from 1911 until his death in 1926. During that time, did he ever mention owing money to the Crane family? Never, and I would know. I was the only friend he had. He told me everything. Did he ever speak about the Cranes at all? Della Mae's eyes found Victor Crane in the courtroom. He spoke about them often. Crawford Crane came to Ezekiel in 1925 and demanded to buy the mineral rights to his land. Ezekiel refused. Crawford threatened him, said he would take the land one way or another. Ezekiel was so frightened that he sealed the cave and spread rumors that it was cursed, just to make Crawford lose interest. He deliberately created the rumors about a curse? Yes, to protect his life's work from thieves. And the promissory note. In your opinion, as someone who knew Ezekiel intimately, is there any possibility that he borrowed money from Crawford Crane? Della Mae's voice rang clear as a bell. None whatsoever. Ezekiel would have died before he took a penny from that family. And in the end, that is exactly what he did. Judge Whitmore had no choice. The evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Marsh's testimony was unimpeachable. The forgery was proven beyond any reasonable doubt. Whitmore dismissed the case. He ordered Crane to pay court costs. He issued a formal reprimand for filing a fraudulent claim. But he could not bring himself to look at Crane when he delivered the verdict. And Crane did not look at Willa or me. He stared straight ahead, his face carved from stone, as his entire scheme collapsed around him. Martha Crenshaw, the woman who had whispered poor things about us for years, approached me outside the courthouse. Her face was pale. I was wrong about you, she said. About both of you. I called you pitiful when you were stronger than any of us. Billy Tanner, the young man who had bet $5 we would run away before Christmas, stood at the edge of the crowd. He did not approach. He did not need to. The look on his face said everything. He had bet on the wrong sisters. Afterward, as we stood on the courthouse steps watching the autumn leaves drift down from the maples, Soren put his arm around me. It is over, he said. No. I watched Crane's black automobile pull away from the curb. Men like him do not stop. They just find different ways to fight. Then we will find different ways to win. He was right, but so was I. The consequences came swiftly. The state bar investigated Crane's attorney and found evidence of prior fraudulent filings. He was disbarred within 6 months. The bank that Crane owned began losing customers as word spread about what he had tried to do. By the end of 1944, he had sold the bank and moved to Charlotte. He never came back to Watauga County. Franklin Moss, the man who had called himself a geologist and declared our cave worthless years ago, appeared at our door one evening in November. He stood on the porch with his hat in his hands and his eyes on his feet. I came to apologize, and he said, I took Crane's money to dismiss your minerals without even looking. I said what he paid me to say. I could have been angry. I could have sent him away. But I thought about what Ezekiel had written in his letter. Make something beautiful. Would you like to see the cave? I asked. He looked up, startled. Really? Really see what you almost helped destroy? Then decide what kind of man you want to be. He spent 3 hours in the first chamber. When he emerged, his face was wet with tears. I have spent my life studying rocks, he said, and I almost helped someone destroy the most remarkable deposit I have ever seen. For money. for a man I knew was corrupt. What will you do now? Whatever I can, to make it right. He spent the next decade documenting our cave for scientific journals. His papers on the mineral deposits brought geologists from around the world to study what Ezekiel had found. He never took a penny for his work. We are coming to the end now. But before I tell you how the story finishes, I want to pause one more time. Delamay spent 11 years waiting for the right people to come and break the chains. She taught them everything she knew, and then she left the world wrapped in the colors of the mountains she loved. Some people live to create, others live to pass on what they have learned. Delamay did both. As we move into the final chapter, ask yourself this: what are you waiting to pass on? What knowledge or love or beauty are you carrying that deserves to outlive you? Hold that thought. The ending is coming. Delamay died in the spring of 1945. She passed on a morning so bright the mountains looked painted, which I think she would have appreciated. She was 79 years old and she went peacefully in her sleep, in the cabin she had lived in for 60 years, surrounded by the textiles she had woven from colors we had given her. I made her burial blanket myself. I used every color from Ezekiel's cave: ochre and sienna and ultramarine and malachite green and the vermilion red that she had once called the color of a heart that knows it is loved. I worked on it for 3 days without sleeping, and when it was finished, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever created. We buried her on the ridge, where she could see the hollow and the mountains beyond. The whole community came, even people who had once whispered about the crazy girls who lived in Ezekiel's cabin. They stood in silence as we lowered Delamay into the earth, wrapped in colors that had come from the mountains she loved. Willa painted her portrait afterward. It hangs now in the third chamber, beside Ezekiel's ceiling. Two creators, united across death by the colors they had shared. Soren and I married in the summer of 1946. The wedding was small, held on the ridge where we had buried Delamay. Willa stood beside me as my witness. Copper, who was 9 years old by then, his muzzle gray with age, lay at my feet throughout the ceremony. Soren built us a studio above ground, a large room with windows on 3 sides that filled with mountain light from dawn to dusk. I wove there. Willa painted there, and sometimes in the evenings, we would go down to the third chamber and sit beneath Ezekiel's ceiling and remember how far we had come. "Do you think he knew?" Willa asked one night. "When he sealed the cave, do you think he knew we would come?" "I think he hoped." "That is not the same thing." "No, but sometimes hope is all we have, and sometimes it is enough." Copper died in the winter of 1952. He went peacefully in his sleep, in front of the fireplace he had claimed as his own from the very first night. He was 15 years old, his copper coat faded to silver in places, his eyes clouded but still full of the loyalty that had defined his life. I buried him on the hill overlooking the cave entrance. The headstone was simple: Copper, the first friend who found us. Willa painted him from memory, a young dog with bright eyes and copper fur, standing at the edge of the forest, waiting to be discovered. "He knew we needed him," she said as she worked. "He was waiting for us that day, just like the cave was waiting." Do you really believe that? I believe that lost things find each other. I believe that we were not the only ones who needed saving. She finished the painting and hung it in the studio, where the morning light would catch the copper tones and make them glow. My children were born into color. A daughter in 1948, a son in 1951. They grew up knowing the cave the way other children know their backyards, intimately, casually, with their hands perpetually stained with pigment and their clothes perpetually marked with evidence of where they had been. My daughter became a painter, like Willa. My son became a geologist, following in the footsteps of Franklin Moss, who had taught him to see minerals the way artists see light. Between them, they understood Ezekiel's legacy from both sides: the beauty in the stone, the art and the science. Willa never married, but she was not alone. She had her paintings, which hung in museums across the country. She had her students, young artists, who came from far away to learn the ancient techniques of natural pigment. She had the hollow and the mountains and the endless changing light that had called her home before she was even born. She was 42 when the documentary aired, still painting, still teaching, still finding new colors in the walls of Ezekiel's cave. "What will happen when we are gone?" she asked me one evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun set over the Blue Ridge. Who will keep the colors alive? Our children, our students, everyone we have taught. Is that enough? I thought about Ezekiel, who had spent 16 years alone in the dark, creating something he knew he might never live to see appreciated. I thought about Delamay, who had waited 11 years for strangers to appear and claim a legacy that was not her own. I thought about our mother, who had died giving life, and our father who had broken under the weight of loss. It is more than we started with, I said. It is more than anyone gave us. Willa nodded slowly. Then it is enough. 20 years passed like light through colored glass. In 1958, the state of North Carolina designated Ezekiel's Cave a cultural heritage site. The governor came to Sable Hollow for the ceremony. He stood in the third chamber and looked up at the ceiling that had been hidden from the world for over 30 years. And he said words that I had been waiting my whole life to hear. This is art, this is history, and this is North Carolina's treasure. They put up a plaque beside the cave entrance. Ezekiel Harmon sealed this cave with chains. Rosa Harmon Whitfield and Willa Harmon broke them. What was inside was never a curse. It was a gift waiting for hands brave enough to receive it. Willa cried when she saw it. I did too. In 1963, an art historian from New York published a monograph on Ezekiel's ceiling. He called it the most significant undiscovered American artwork of the 20th century. Museums requested exhibitions. Scholars wrote dissertations. The crazy hermit of Sable Hollow became, posthumously, a visionary artist whose work would be studied for generations. The documentary came in 1967. A film crew spent 3 months in the hollow, capturing everything: the cave, the pigments, the ceiling, Willa's paintings, the story of 2 orphan girls who had broken the chains and found a world of color waiting for them. Millions of people watched when it aired. The day I knew the legacy was secure came in the summer of 1967, after the documentary had aired and the world had finally learned what Ezekiel had created. I was 47 years old. My hair was streaked with gray. My hands, which had once been smooth, were weathered from years of grinding pigment and working the loom. A school bus pulled up to the cabin that morning, filled with children from an orphanage in Asheville. A woman from the state had organized the trip, she said, because every child deserved to see beauty. I recognized the name of the orphanage, Evergreen Home for Girls. It had become co-ed sometime in the 50s, but the building was the same. The gray walls were the same. The silence inside was the same. I led the children into the cave myself. I showed them the first chamber with its rivers of color. I let them touch the ochre and the azurite and the malachite. I explained how Ezekiel had discovered that the mountain was full of treasure that no one else could see. Then I took them to the third chamber. They stood beneath the ceiling in wonder. Some of them cried. Some of them laughed. One boy, who could not have been more than 7, tugged on my sleeve and asked a question I had never been asked before. Did the man who painted this ever feel sad? I knelt down to his level. I think he felt sad often. He was alone for a long time. People thought he was crazy. They did not understand what he was doing. Then why did he keep painting? I looked up at the ceiling, spring blooming at the center, summer spreading outward, autumn blazing, winter waiting at the edges. Because some things are worth doing even when no one understands. Because beauty does not need an audience to be real. And because he knew that someday someone would come and see it. I squeezed the boy's shoulder. Someone like you. The boy looked at the ceiling again. Then he looked at me. Can I learn to paint like that? You can learn to paint your own way. That is even better. After the children left, I stood at the cave entrance and watched their bus disappear down the mountain road. The chains that Ezekiel had wrapped around the door still lay in the grass where they had fallen 29 years ago. I had never moved them. I wanted them there as a reminder of what had been locked away, of what had been waiting, of what we had found the courage to release. Willa and I lived to see the new century, though just barely. She went first in 1999, surrounded by her paintings and her students and the colors she had loved since before she could speak. She was 74 years old, and the last thing she painted was the view from her window, the hollow, the mountains, the light. I followed her 2 years later, in the winter of 2001. Soren had been gone for 7 years by then, and my children had children of their own, and the Harmon Pigment Company was being run by my granddaughter, who ground pigment by hand the way Ezekiel had taught me through his notebook, and I had taught her through mine. They found me in the third chamber, sitting beneath the ceiling with a jar of ultramarine in my hand. That impossible blue, ground from stone deeper than any sky. My daughter said I was smiling. My son said I looked like someone who had finally become part of the painting. And now I want to ask you one final thing. Before we close this story, I want you to think about your own life. What chains are you standing in front of? What door has been locked by fear, or by someone else's warning, or by the whispered consensus that whatever is inside is not worth the risk? What color have you been told does not exist? What beauty have you been told you cannot create? What part of yourself have you been told is too strange, too impractical, too much? Because here is what Ezekiel knew, and what Rosa and Willa learned the day they picked up that hammer. The chains are never there to protect you from what is inside. They are there to protect what is inside until you are ready. And when you are ready, they will break easier than you think. Leave a comment and tell me what chains you are thinking about breaking. I will be here to listen. Epilogue: the cave is still open. The pigments are still being produced, carefully, sustainably, by a small team of apprentices who grind by hand the way Ezekiel taught Rosa, and Rosa taught her children, and her children taught theirs. The ceiling painting is illuminated now by gentle electric light, and thousands of people visit each year to stand beneath it and feel what Rosa felt at 17. Above the cave entrance, where the iron rings still hold the remnants of Ezekiel's broken chains, the plaque from 1958 has weathered 60 winters. The bronze letters have turned green with age, but the words remain as clear as the day they were carved. Visitors often pause to trace them with their fingers before stepping inside. Every year, children from the Asheville orphanage visit the cave. They stand beneath Ezekiel's ceiling, just as Rosa and Willa once did, and they learn the same truth those two sisters discovered in 1937. Some doors only look locked, some chains only exist in our minds, and some treasures wait a lifetime for the right hands to find them. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the colors you have not yet found and the doors you have not yet opened, then do something for me. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more stories about ordinary people who found the courage to break their chains. Your cave is waiting, and what is inside is more beautiful than anyone told you was possible. The Enduin, the Nasarnum,